As I said, welcome to everyone joining us across the world. As we've already heard, we've got folks in India and France and Germany. We're thrilled to have you with us. I'm Tamara Tate, the Associate Director of the Digital Learning Lab at the University of California, Irvine. The UC Irvine School of Education and the Spencer Foundation are really pleased to sponsor today's event, which brings leading scholars across the nation together to discuss generative AI in education. We're really committed to supporting our growing community of educators, researchers, and other educational stakeholders by offering resources and learning opportunities like today's webinar and also the pensandpixels.org website. You can find a lot of resources on that website, and so we encourage you to visit that after the webinar's over. So I'm going to give Sri Lanka, welcome. I'd like to now provide some more logistics. So we've got almost 1,600 people registered for the event this morning, and we're all participating as of now, because we're only at a little over 400 on the Zoom webinar platform. If we get larger than 1,000, we will also pop over to a YouTube live stream. If you'd like to turn on closed captions, that's been enabled, so feel free to click the live transcript button and enable captioning. You can ask questions directly to our moderators by using the Q&A feature or simply placing your question in the chat. Our team members will be monitoring that throughout the day and gathering your questions. Please know that the chat transcript will be made available on the pensandpixels.org website, along with a recording of all the presentations. It may take us a few days to get it up there, but it will be there. So keep in mind, we're being recorded, and so are your chats. Because we found that there's usually some really great resources that are shared in these sorts of chats where people are pointing people to books and websites and materials. So that will be gathered for you. All right. Because we have a lot of folks and a lot to say today, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker today. Mark Warschauer is a professor of education at UC Irvine and the director of the Digital Learning Lab. His full bio is on the pensandpixels.org website, so I will let you read that at your leisure, but take it away, Mark.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, let's see. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. Amra, can you see the screen? Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm so excited, and I'd like to try to kick off our discussions by presenting a framework for thinking about generative AI in education based on some foundational work on technology, literacy, and social inclusion. So, after ChatGPT came out in the end of November, we've all seen the headlines. Starting in December 2022, the end of high school English, and then the next month in January, the bans against ChatGPT in schools started to come out, and then a month later in February, when talking to AI is described as the most important job skill of the 21st century. So what is going on? How can we think about this in terms of education? These are radically different perspectives. So let's start by just briefly introducing what we're talking about. The best known and most widely used generative AI tool is ChatGPT, as I'm sure you all know. And ChatGPT can remarkably spit out an essay on any topic. Here in about 5 seconds, I asked it to write a biography of myself, which was pretty impressive. We might return to this one later. So how is it able to do these things? Is there a secret, intelligent being that's helping with them all, write all this? Well, actually, it's much more mundane than this. Elizabeth, take a look at this screen. What do you see there? What do those grayed out words mean?
Mark, it looks like it's an autocomplete, autofill kind of.
Exactly. That's an auto completion in an email message. And how in the heck does Gmail know what words to suggest there?
Well, I'm assuming it's keeping track of messages we've written, and there's some sort of language processing,
Exactly. It's
AI
based on
that's doing that.
exactly. It's based on billions of messages that people have written. And ChatGPT basically works the same way, except on a much bigger scale. It's trained on everything that's been published online in the last 8 years, and very complex algorithms to process that. ChatGPT 3, which was the foundation of ChatGPT when it was released, was trained on 500 billion tokens, which is about 350 billion words and some other units. GPT-4, which is the most powerful current version, nobody knows exactly, but it's probably trained on 13 trillion tokens. So this allows it, by processing this information with its algorithms, it can instantly write ideas on any topic and voice. It can write essays. It can brainstorm ideas for essay writing. It can summarize at length anything that's previously been written. It can quickly write counter arguments to essays. ChatGPT can provide actionable feedback on essays, and it can actually do this pretty well, as we'll see later today when Tamara presents. It can translate in and out of many languages, at least for a wide range of languages, better than specialized tools like Google Translate. For instructors, it can create unit plans, lesson plans, and assignments. It can create quizzes and tests. And I don't know if any of you have checked this out yet, but in this new prompt interpreter, as part of the paid ChatGPT plan, it can actually analyze any uploaded data files. You can upload Excel files or files from other software with data, and it can instantly analyze it. So all these things are incredibly powerful. But as a lot of people have noted, the tool is far from perfect. So let's look back at that bio of me it generated. The first couple of paragraphs are actually quite good, but you get to the last paragraph and things get a little bit dodgy. It says I've been a visiting scholar at Harvard, Stanford, and Cambridge, but I've actually never been a visiting scholar at any of them. It's just making guesses based on patterns in texts, and those guesses happen to be wrong. So because it's based on available online information, it can also lead to biases, as widely recognized. Here's an example where in the sentence, the paralegal married the attorney because she was pregnant. ChatGPT automatically assumed that it was the paralegal rather than the attorney was pregnant, because as it passed through its data, it believed that attorneys were much more likely to be male, and basically concluded that an attorney couldn't be female and couldn't be pregnant. Beyond biases, it can resort to stereotypes. When we asked ChatGPT to generate some ideas for bilingual narrative ebooks we were creating for children, we actually liked the idea of magical piñata or counting with abuela. But some of us found the idea of an ebook titled Little Tortilla Boy to be cringeworthy. And these problems of bias and stereotype are also extended to other types of generative AI, for example, in image generation, as reflected in this widely circulated example of responses to the question put to Midjourney, what does a professor look like in particular fields? So it can lead to misinformation, stereotype, bias. That's enough for a lot of people to say, and not even getting to issues of plagiarism. So all these things are leading a lot of people to say we should just forget about using it in education. It's too problematic right now. And I would push back about that. I push back against that idea, because generative AI has very powerful affordances with great promise for enhancing educational and social equity. So let's think about who stands to benefit from ChatGPT. Think of the example of the student with cognitive or learning disabilities who needs assistance in writing emails. Think about the immigrant, small businessman who wants to compete against other businesses with deeper pockets and could use assistance in developing promotional or marketing materials. Or an issue that's true to my heart because of my background in applied linguistics and second language learning. Think about the scientist in Korea or Japan or Egypt or many countries around the world who never majored in English, but now is required to publish and present for their entire career in English for their own academic advancement to get their research heard. This is a tremendous tax that non-English speakers around the world have to pay in professional and business life. All of these people can benefit enormously from use of generative AI tools. So if we want to assist these diverse groups in educational settings, we have to be aware of key contradictions related to generative AI in education. And the first of these is what I call the imitation contradiction. And that is that English learners or developing writers are constantly told they need to imitate native speakers' English language use or expert writers' language use. But when they borrow exact phrases from these sources, they can often be accused of plagiarism or academic dishonesty. So remember that Korean scientist we spoke about a minute ago. Picture her back a few years earlier as a high school student. Here she might be forbidden from using ChatGPT. In fact, it is exactly the students who might benefit most from AI-assisted writing who can most be subject to discipline or punishment for using it, as their improvement in writing will stand out the most. This applies not only to English learners, but to other developing or struggling writers. Another contradiction is what I call the rich get richer contradiction. AI is an incredibly powerful tool for assisting communication, but ironically, to get the most out of it, you need to know how to prompt it well, critically evaluate its output, and edit and incorporate it into your work. You need some writing skills to benefit from it. And finally, there is the with or without contradiction. If students never learn to use AI, they will be at a disadvantage in their advanced studies and careers. On the other hand, if they use AI too much and too early, they'll also be at a disadvantage as they will be robbed of foundational skills necessary to use it well. Similar in a way to the concept of a graphing calculator, which is an essential tool in advanced mathematics, but can backfire, obviously, if used at too young of an age. All this ties together in what I call the June-July contradiction. In June, when students are in school, they may get punished for using ChatGPT. However, in July, when they're out in the workforce, they may get punished for not knowing how to use ChatGPT, as employers care more about efficiency and productivity than they care about authenticity. So how can we handle these contradictions? Well, we have some experience with that from earlier stages of information and communication technologies. At first, many teachers were terrified that use of computers and the internet would lead to distraction or cheating or poor writing, as students spent their times on text messages rather than on reading and writing Shakespeare. But over time, we realized that there were valuable digital literacy skills that were critical for knowledge production in today's world. And we sought ways how to teach these skills, like information literacy or multimodal literacy. We also paid attention to overcoming inequality by examining the set of resources that students need, from physical resources like computers and internet access, to digital resources like relevant online content in their own languages, to human resources like social literacy and education, and social resources such as community and institutional support. All of these in order to effectively use information and communication technologies to access, adapt, and create knowledge. Well, we can draw on this past work to consider the components of AI literacy, a new stage of digital literacy, and how it can be used to promote equitable education. So in our digital learning lab, we've taken a stab at that, and we've come up with a 5-part framework for promoting generative AI literacy. The first step is to understand generative AI. And there's some great work out there. We love using this demonstration that was developed by Emily Thomford of AI for California. Emily has modeled a large language network that was trained solely on green eggs and ham by Dr. Seuss. It illustrates nicely the probabilistic modeling underlying these language models, with a thickness of arrows indicating the likelihood of word combinations. So based on this particular book, the word I is most likely followed by would or do, or sometimes am, and on and on. This is a nice, simple example to illustrate how text generation works that I think children of all ages can learn something from. We're taking this deeper in our lab. Some of you may have seen the simulation in the New York Times that illustrated large language models trained on nothing but Harry Potter or Jane Austen books. And we're borrowing that from that to develop an AI literacy curriculum for middle school students. We call that Code AI. Code AI will make use of an underlying platform called NanoGPT, and that's the exact one that was used in this New York Times simulation. It's a platform where anybody can create their own miniature large language model. So, we're also going to create a block-based language similar to Scratch for students to program their own NanoGPT. And then they'll be able to train it with publicly available data sets like Wikipedia or open access textbooks or children's literature from Project Gutenberg. We're calling the models that students will create student language innovation models, or SLIMs, since they're smaller, lighter versions of the large language models like ChatGPT. Then they will develop uses of these SLIMs to address challenges and problems in their own local communities. The next step after understand is access. We need to help students know and gain access to a range of appropriate AI tools. This can be problematic as some of these tools cost money or are unreliable or require a cell phone number, or for children under 18 require parent consent. Our work in this area is inspired by a group called Youth Voices, a youth-powered social network and multimedia publishing platform affiliated with the National Writing Project. To give students access to ChatGPT, Youth Voices created their own site using a WordPress plugin that connects to ChatGPT. So instead of requiring an account or login, the teen writers on this site can write directly on Youth Voices Live, choose among a wide range of pre-written prompts, and then submit their work to ChatGPT through Youth Voices Live. Inspired by that, we're starting a new project called Generative AI in Engineering Writing Courses in partnership with the UC Irvine School of Engineering. That school offers a required course for all engineering students called Communications in the Professional World. You'll hear a little bit about the curriculum later today from Tamara's talk for that and other work we're doing at UC Irvine. But for now, I wanted to briefly discuss the platform we're creating. Basically, each teacher will have their own page, that web page that offers students access to GPT-4. The page will have a set of embedded prompts that we've already written, such as for receiving feedback on a paper or generating a summary or an outline, plus any other prompts that that specific teacher wants to add. Students in that teacher's course will log on to that page, and then they'll get free prioritized access to ChatGPT through its API, where they can submit text of any length and use all the embedded prompts by just clicking on options. Finally, this will allow both the instructors and research team to create usage logs for the class and for individual students, which should provide a goldmine of data on how students can use it. So keep tuned in to our digital learning lab. We hope to have examples of this, more details on it as the year progresses. This leads to the third component of our AI literacy framework, which is prompting. ChatGPT can be extremely powerful, but you have to know how to prompt it well, thoughtfully, and in detail to get good results. This is also an iterative process, since ChatGPT remembers everything said in a particular session, even if you go back to that session a week later, and it will respond to subsequent prompts. A terrific example of the power of prompting comes from Kailing Hua. That's a pseudonym. It's a graduate student that uses ChatGPT in amazingly sophisticated ways. Though Kailing is a non-native speaker of English who didn't major in English in college, and didn't go to college in the United States, first came to the US as a graduate student, she's one of the best academic writers of any graduate student at her university, writing course papers, manuscripts publication, and even professional grant proposals at the quality of a very skilled full professor. She does that through a highly interactive joint authoring process of back and forth communication with ChatGPT across all stages of the writing process. We're conducting a case study of Kailing, and I've had several interviews with her to document that process. So Kailing starts by brainstorming ideas with ChatGPT. She asks it to give her ideas on her topic, elaborate on the one she likes best, raise any potential concerns, and discuss the pros and cons. She similarly uses ChatGPT to gather background research. She queries it for lists of researchers, asks it for themes on her research topic, asks which researchers are most relevant to that themes, and asks what funded projects have taken place in the particular state that she's conducting this on Georgia or on related topics. Then comes the part of composing text. She develops a detailed outline, and she asks ChatGPT for help in developing a draft. Finally, she uses ChatGPT in the editing. She works with the draft extensively. She adds a lot of details from her own research and her own knowledge. Then when it's complete, she asks ChatGPT to help revise individual paragraph. But then she does a final review of the entire document, ensuring that it's accurate, but it also comes across with her own voice and feel of being hers. And this really taken together is a remarkable new form of authorship that couldn't have been possible before, but allows her to extend her and amplify her own considerable strengths to produce high quality work through this kind of human-computer joint authorship. So the final stage of all of this is to corroborate. And out of curiosity, I asked ChatGPT to list 10 important papers I've written. Take a second to guess how many of them are actually papers that I authored. Go ahead and post it in the chat if you'd like. I'll wait 30 seconds. Okay, Elizabeth, what's your guess? How many of these do you think are ones that I actually authored?
Wow, Mark, if I'd known you were going to keep calling on me, I would have brought my AI to help me. I would say, and I know Mark's work, so I'd say maybe 8, maybe 7, somewhere in there.
Well, that's actually a pretty good guess. It is 6. But I'm not surprised that you said 7 or 8, because the other 4 are all titles that topics that I've written about and could easily have been written about me. And I think some of them are actually real papers, but they're just not ones that I happen to author. So corroboration is important. Here's an even more interesting example. So I'm going to go beyond text generation to what is known as deep fake videos. I taught a course in AI in education last quarter, and 2 of the students of the course for their final project developed this deep fake video of me. And well, I'll just go ahead and play the video, and maybe Tamara and Elizabeth, you can give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. It might be soft, so.
I would like to give everyone a perfect grade in this class because all of you are so cool. Also, shout out to Jacob for being the best one in the room.
I'll play that one more time.
Good afternoon. I would like to give everyone a perfect grade in this class because all of you are so cool. Also, shout out to Jacob for being the best one in the room.
Okay, Tamara, Elizabeth, could you hear that? Yeah, good. So as you can hear, I'm stating that all the students should get an A, especially Jacob, who happened to be the student who worked this together. This was an amateur. I didn't say any of those things. This was an amateur, low budget work that was based on some other video that that they found online that took very little time to put together. The sophistication of today's AI from text, generated from textual, audio, and audiovisual information, requires very sophisticated approaches to corroborate. If somebody had done a really, really high-skilled job, I mean, it would be very hard for you to tell.
Good afternoon.
Whoops.
I would like to give everyone a perfect
I'm going to
grade.
try to go to the next. There it is. So the traditional approach to corroborating online information that arose in the era of digital literacy is something that we call vertical reading. It's digging deeper into a document or site to explore its accuracy, its purpose, or authority. There's a problem, though. If you dig deeper and deeper into a paper that was written by ChatGPT or into a deepfake video, you may not be able to discover its inauthenticity. Sam Weinberg at the Stanford School of Education and his group there recognized this, and they did work with professional fact checkers, and they found that these people rarely, if ever, use these vertical reading techniques of digging deeper and deeper. Rather, they found it much more quick and reliable to use what they call lateral reading. In lateral reading, rather than digging deeper in a particular document or video, you look to other reliable sources to see what it says about the topic of it and if it matches. This is especially important in the age of AI. If ChatGPT lists references, those references obviously have to be cross-checked elsewhere. And if a student encounters information online, whether it's textual or a video of Joe Biden talking about how only foolish people like to take vaccines, the student probably can't verify the veracity of it by studying the video, but only by checking other reliable sources to see if they back up that claim. So lateral reading and corroboration, which were already important in the era of digital literacy, are even more critical in the age of generative AI. The final step is to teach students how to incorporate AI-generated content into their own work. And I found this sample syllabus on one university, which basically prohibits students from any use of AI language models in course assignments. And I fear that if we adopt this kind of approach, we'll be robbing of our students of the AI literacy skills needed for their futures. I personally prefer this syllabus developed by Ryan Baker, professor of education at Penn, who tells students they are welcome to use foundation models such as ChatGPT in an unrestricted fashion for any purpose at no penalty. He goes on to counsel them on the dangers they should pay attention to, such as inaccuracies or biases, and points out that use has to be documented. But he concludes by specifically encouraging use of these models, as it may make it possible for students to submit higher quality assignments in less time. So I hope this gives you an overview of how our digital learning lab sees generative AI literacy. I'd like to close with a few thought-provoking quotations on technology, literacy, and social inclusion. Though all of these were written at least 35 years ago, I think they're very helpful for framing our thinking about generative AI in education. The first is by Gregory Bateson, a brilliant anthropologist, social scientist, linguist, semiotician, and cyberneticist, whose work intersected many other fields as well. I was fortunate enough to have Dr. Bateson as a professor at UC Santa Cruz, and who not long after he wrote this book, and I still remember how he would answer this question, "What's your field?" by responding, "I'm not a cow, I don't have a field." Anyway, this interdisciplinary work gave him great brilliance. And one of his best metaphors is about the blind man and the stick. And Bateson ponders where the blind man's sensory perception ends. Does it end at the end of his hand? Does it end at the tip of the stick, or somewhere in between? This metaphor makes clear that tools become part of human agency and activity and shouldn't be viewed as separate from them. And the next quote is from Walter Ong, historian, philosopher, and language scholar, who applied the same line of thinking to literacy, saying that technologies are not mere exterior aids, but also interior transformations of consciousness, and never more so than when they affect the word. We have to be open to understanding how use of new forms of AI will help us see and think about the world in entirely new ways. And finally, there's the work of Shoshana Zuboff, an ethnographer who carried out research on information technology in the early 1980s, some 40 years ago. Even though this was a decade before the development of the World Wide Web, it still has valuable lessons for today. Zuboff conducted in-depth multi-year studies of office, factory, professional, executive, and craft workplaces characterized by a shift from traditional to computer-mediated task environments. And she noticed two distinct processes in these companies. On the one hand, as with previous manufacturing technologies, companies sought to automate to increase their productivity by removing human agency and skill from the processes. But more importantly, and unique to this stage, companies could also informate, which meant taking advantage of these new technologies to provide more information, knowledge, and skill to employees so they could have more agency and control rather than less in the productive process. And she found that companies that were informating were the best, were also the most successful. And she summed this up nicely in the end of her book. The informated organization relies on the human capacities for teaching and learning, criticism, and insight. It reflects the interdependence between the human mind and one of its most sophisticated productions. As one worker mused, and here she quoted one of her interviewees, "If you don't let people grow and develop and make more decisions, it's a waste of human life, a waste of human potential. If you don't use your knowledge and skill, it's a waste of life. Using the new technology to its full potential means using the person to their full potential." I would suggest that AI-based writing, communication, and knowledge production also reflects the interdependence between the human mind and one of its most sophisticated productions, and that using this new technology to its fullest also and especially means using the person to their full potential. So let us all get on with that task. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your questions and interacting with you throughout the day and throughout the coming years as we work with these exciting new technologies.
Thank you, Mark. We really appreciate that. And we're getting some great comments and suggestions and questions in the chat. Please feel free to keep it up, folks. But I'm going to now ask our panelists to respond, beginning with Elizabeth Moje, the Dean of the Dean Herbert. Okay, this is a horrible one. Sorry, Elizabeth. George Herbert Mead Collegiate Professor of Education and an Arthur F. Thurnau Professor of Literacy, Language, and Culture in the Marshall Family School of Education at the University of Michigan. We look forward to hearing from you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Tamara, and thanks, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Thumbs up. Yeah, great. You can blame the title on, artificial intelligence. We just made all that up. So I am really excited to be here with all of you, and thank you all for participating. This is exciting to see all the people from around the world. And I want to start by thanking Dr. Warschauer, both for inviting me to participate in this important conversation and for that amazing talk. I was just, wrapped, and I had seen the slides beforehand and, was taking constant notes. So I'll try to actually add in some of the things that you talked about, Mark, because you've really given us all a great deal to think about. And it's a powerful way to start what I'm sure will be a generative, please forgive the generative AI pun there, several hours in the rest of the day of presentation, exploration, and conversation. Now, when I was invited to participate in this panel, I eagerly agreed for two reasons. First, I am not an expert in AI, and I really want to learn more. And I guess probably that's kind of an important caveat too, as I continue to talk. You may think, why did they ask her? But second, I see AI advances in recent months, and really this has been work that's being done for years, obviously, but the game changer that occurred in the last several months, it's really exciting, and it is truly generative. And so I want to begin with that point, because I really want to underscore what Mark said, that we need to embrace AI, not prohibit or restrict it. To quote one of my favorite pop cultural icons, resistance is futile. And let's not go there. Let's not go to that place of resistance. Let's actually try to, embrace and move forward, and also do the education work that needs to be done. Let's not get all worked up about cheating and plagiarism and all the other ills, although we need to take those seriously, especially some of the things that Mark pointed out, but really actually think about what we can do to forestall those problems and embrace the possibilities. And this is where I think we really need to do our greatest work in, with apologies to Bateson, in the field of education. We need to educate teachers and leaders on the practices that we're going to need so that we can all use AI productively, and so that we can elevate opportunities for every single child to have access to high quality AI-informed instruction. So that's my strong stance, and I'm really eager to continue to learn more so that I can be helpful in the teacher and district education work that I do here in Michigan, and that I think many of us are doing around the world. I can imagine, for example, teachers, school teachers, public school teachers, private school teachers, charter public school teachers, and university faculty members actually changing the way they make assignments so that the work becomes more meaningful and the learning possibilities are more robust. People worry, for example, that students will cheat on written work by having ChatGPT write their essays for them. And surely if someone simply produced a chat essay and did no other work, none of the work that Mark was talking about, that might be considered a form of cheating. But what if, instead of worrying about cheating, and to forestall cheating, returning to outdated methods like handwriting the infamous blue book in class, which is actually a suggestion I have heard already from several colleagues. What if instead we asked ourselves whether our assignments are worth doing? And what if we developed writing tasks that are so meaningful, students will want to do the writing themselves, or will want to edit what AI produces in a first or even a second or third or fifth pass, so that what they're writing about matters so much to them, they care about editing the AI production, that they actually think, maybe I have more to say or more voice that could come through in this work of writing. What if, by following the Digital Learning Lab's heuristics for working with AI, so understand, access, prompt, corroborate, and integrate, to which I would add interrogate, but more on that in a minute. What if we find that we're instead teaching students how to plan for writing, how to ask good questions, how to evaluate evidence, and more important, how to evaluate bias and discrimination, so that they can improve upon a text? Teachers across disciplines might actually start teaching writing instead of merely assigning and assessing it. And of course, in the process of teaching writing, we're also teaching reading. We're teaching that deep reading that is so important to success and to human thriving in this world. So in other words, if we embrace AI and teach with it rather than against it, we could actually improve students' reading and writing skills. And we might actually improve our own teaching. We could develop strong critical thinkers. And I would say, more important from a justice perspective, we could engage students in questioning received wisdom through evidence-based analysis. And I thought Mark's points about corroboration were so powerful and so important. But there's a moment where we would actually have to push students to get out of echo chambers and corroborate with a range of texts. So I would argue it's not enough to say we need to read laterally, but we need to read texts that don't necessarily conform with our preconceived notions. And are there ways that engaging students with AI products could push us to do that as teachers, to help our students read across different viewpoints? Now, there's a concern, of course, with the very real problem, as Mark showed us, of AI being used to generate more lies posing as facts. But that's going to happen regardless of how educators think about AI. So we can recognize that, but not let it stop us from doing the work that we can do as educators with AI. So for me, the only solution is to use AI to teach how to read AI generated material and to teach how to write more effectively. Now, that said, although I hope you can see I'm wildly positive about the possibilities for truly game-changing outcomes advanced by AI, I'm also increasingly worried about the exacerbation of the haves and the have-nots. And, you know, Mark, you talked a lot about ways that students who might not traditionally have experienced success in school can actually benefit from AI, but you didn't talk as much about the costs associated with AI and other technology tools that are necessary for accessing really high quality AI products. And many of us participating in this session know that education systems privilege those with wealth. I mean, we only need to turn to Duncan and Murnane's book, Wither Opportunity, to see evidence of that, glaring evidence. The income quintiles in the US exactly match achievement quintiles. So we know that education and wealth are interrelated. And that recognition raises questions of access, big questions of access. So Mark, you appropriately said we need to make sure that kids can access AI. But, you know, I'm doing some work in a project right now studying the challenges that children and families faced during the pandemic, looking very closely at data related to very specific instances of lack of technology access, lack of stable technology tools. And, you know, what's interesting is I'm really just reporting that the pandemic exacerbated those issues, right? These have been issues for years. That's what we talk about when we talk about the digital divide. But that really worries me. It makes me question how do we ensure that every child across the country gets access, because even many of our under-resourced schools cannot provide the kind of access that I think we would need to do this work really, really well. The second kind of access issue or question that I have is, who will get the kind of AI-supported education we envision? You know, how will that education get delivered to them? And how will we ensure that teachers are prepared to educate in those ways? So you played out this incredible heuristic, and you told us about some of the work you're doing, and I applauded, and I will be following up because I really want to know more about the engineering classes, because we're working on that as well. But you know, in Michigan, this is just the state of Michigan, I can't speak for every state, but educator preparation requirements still only require 1 credit of technology instruction for prospective teachers. So how will ed prep and in-service professional development incorporate the heuristic Mark laid out for us? How will we ensure it gets to every teacher and every child? And will that educator preparation and development include attention to the idea that AI-generated texts need not only be corroborated, but also interrogated for racial, ethnic, gendered, and classed bias and discrimination? So Mark and team, I would encourage adding interrogation to that heuristic, because I think it's slightly different from corroboration. As we know, we can actually find facts that are generated across many different sources, only later to learn that they were biased, that they were racially biased, gendered bias, and so on. So I think that's a really important dimension to add. And don't even get me started on how we professionally develop university faculty for AI-informed approaches to teaching. Mark and team, you are doing that. But we as a faculty, I'm a faculty member, we are unfortunately famously immune to requests that we work on our teaching. So what are we going to do to really move the needle there? And moreover, like Qian, who's going to talk about this in a bit, I've observed that even among our most privileged youth attending one elite public university, the necessary skills and perspectives for using technology tools in generative ways are pretty constrained. They can do a lot of things socially, but it's much more challenging for them to use these tools for academic learning. And so we're going to have to work on the scaffolding that's necessary to work even with the most privileged university or secondary and elementary school students. So I'm left with questions, more questions than answers, but that shouldn't surprise anyone because I'm not an expert in this field. But my questions are questions of access, knowledge development, skill development, and educator across the board preparation and development. I think we need a concerted effort in the field of education to discuss those questions, and I hope that that continues to happen throughout the day, to take those questions seriously without devolving to a sky is falling fear of AI, but also without romanticizing the potentials of AI. We need a serious conversation about educating future educators and about providing access to the technology tools necessary to use AI tools effectively. I'm gonna stop here because I know the rest of you know so much more than I do about this work, but I do want to say I look forward to learning from and with all of you as we move forward into this brave new education world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We really appreciate it. And I hate to tell you, but you're as much of an expert as the rest of us. And we will be footnoting you when we add interrogation because you are so very right. And really appreciate you pointing that out. We will next hear from Marcelo Worsley, an assistant professor of learning sciences and computer science at Northwestern School of Education and Social Policy and the McCormick School of Engineering.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, hello, everyone. Definitely thank Mark and Elizabeth for those comments. I kind of want to build on some of the ideas that were shared. And also kind of touch on a few high level ideas. The first I really want to touch on is modality and really thinking about inclusion and opportunities for us to think about what future opportunities could look like with something like a ChatGPT that does not require text-based input. So when we think about students with disabilities, thinking about ways that we can engage learners in sort of formulating strong writing and other sort of strong arguments. One of the things that I'm really excited about is what happens when that modality of input for even engaging with the generative AI system is not purely based on text. You can think about gestural-based inputs. You can think about drawing-based inputs, and really looking at what kind of tools can be put in place so that we expand the ways that even our learners, whether we identify them as being learners with disabilities or not, are able to start to share their ideas and start to engage with, and perhaps we could even say collaborate with, these different sorts of generative AI systems. So really thinking about additional modalities for me is one of the things that I think is exciting, is we kind of look towards some of the future of generative AI. One of the other ones I kind of wanted to touch on is thinking about ways that this type of tool can be used to shift power. In Mark's presentation, we talked a lot about, learners using these tools to recraft their own materials. But I actually also wonder about a shift where the types of I guess you'd say assignments that students are allowed to submit starts to expand, and you instead have a tool like ChatGPT that really works to try to synthesize, summarize and translate some of what students are saying into more of what perhaps a teacher might want to see, or more of what a teacher might expect. Now, I think there's a number of different implications with that around learning and thinking about what those civic learning goals are. But I do sort of generally think about ways that something like generative AI might be able to be useful in starting to shift some of the power relations that exist between students and teachers. Now, having got into that, I think there's a lot of important questions to make around learning. And I think, Mark, you touched on this in one of your comments in talking about the June-July contradiction, right? In June, there's certain things that you're not allowed to do because the goal is authenticity. The goal is learning, versus you show up at a workplace and the goal is typically efficiency or performance. And I think that is going to be one of the tensions that we really we have to think about as a learning space, how we end up trying to operationalize or talk about learning. Are we focusing on the ways that students are developing and advancing in their understanding of certain concepts and certain practices, or are we focusing on their ability to perform, their ability to articulate an argument in a certain way? And so I think that is one of the other tensions that we had to think about. And then even thinking to the example of having something like ChatGPT generate in a curriculum or generate a lesson plan, also have questions there around what is sort of ChatGPT's sort of foundational understanding of what learning is and the type of learning that that it can really try to support. Understanding that it is based on a large language model, and it's typically going out and looking at what other kind of lesson plans are out there. But I think there's ways that we can start to leverage more ideas from learning science and education research to really go beyond the sort of idea of a lesson plan as a sort of a rote set of activities or a rote set of readings, and really start to dig in and maybe even start to interrogate ways that we can sort of creatively start to use a tool like ChatGPT as we go about trying to develop some of our materials. Similarly, on this idea of learning, I think one of the things that I'd be interested in seeing in something like a ChatGPT, and this gets at some of the questions around hallucinations, et cetera, but what does it look like when we can use something like ChatGPT to surface more of the non-typical or divergent or less traditional learning pathways or less traditional knowledge sources, so to speak. And there's a tension here, right? Because at one level, we want to make sure that students are not being introduced to misinformation, they're not being pushed in sort of a wrong direction. But I think there's also an opportunity for us to be able to acknowledge the breadth of pathways, the breadth of ways of explaining or understanding certain concepts. That's something like a system that's based on a large language model that really has a good sort of probabilistic model that underlies it, might be able to help us as we even move away from thinking about every student needing to prescribe to the average, to follow the sort of the tried and true, the very traditional kind of type of path. And then on that same line, along those same lines, really think about opportunities to try to take advantage of the inauthenticity of something like a ChatGPT and start to sort of play with this idea of what happens when we intentionally add in distortions to the point where, in that case of the example of the attorney having the baby, being very intentional and making the point that it is the attorney that is having the baby. In those instances of the mid-journey example of what does a professor look like in these different examples, to actually provide something that goes against the stereotype. So perhaps in that case, you would have a very young woman of color who is sort of intentionally represented within those spaces to kind of be a little bit more proactive in trying to advance inclusion and trying to really start to push against our perceptions of these different kind of stereotypes. And lastly, just want to sort of note something that I see as like an interesting kind of ongoing challenge, which is, I think it's connected to a lot of what we've already been exploring within the inclusion of artificial intelligence, is really thinking about helping learners and people discern when to engage with other people and when to engage with these AI-based tools. I think, there's a possible future. We already see some of this now with different AI-based assistants, speech-based systems in homes and in classrooms, where you can get into a situation where people think that all the answers that they should be seeking, they should be doing so using artificial intelligence. They should be doing so using a generative AI system, for example. But I would problematize that some. I don't think we're trying to move towards a society or even an education system where these AI-based systems are treated as the educator, the oracle, or even the person who I go to if I want to brainstorm. Yes, there's opportunities there, but I think we also want to make sure that, we're in a social setting with other students. We want our students to brainstorm with each other. And part of that goes back to the idea of the learning versus the performing, right? There's a whole practice of, sure, and the system can spit out responses to you, but there's also, I think, a lot of fruitful things that happen within the dialogue, and not just for the learner who's initiating the prompt, but also for other people around them who might be either peripherally involved in that conversation or directly involved in that conversation. So I will leave it there, just with a handful of thoughts, hopefully building on some of the things that were previously stated.
Thank you, Marcelo. That was really helpful. Our final response will be from Chen Du, an associate professor of teaching and associate director in the program in global languages and communication at the University of California, Irvine.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the informative talk, Mark, and the thought-provoking comments and questions from Elizabeth, Marcelo. I'm going to share some of my experiences and observations, primarily coming from a teaching perspective, as I've been working with students in the classroom for a long time. And I wanted to share some of my experience first, coming from a class that I taught in winter 2023. And that was about a month after ChatGPT was first released to the public. And my course was focusing on teaching research and inquiry-based writing skills. And the majority of my students at the time were first-year domestic multilingual students who got placed into that course because their preparedness for academic writing skills were labeled as lacking. And I was curious about how this group of students would be responding to something like ChatGPT. So I designed a couple of writing tasks asking my students to try the tool and share their experiences and reflect on their experiences. We then had class discussions and brainstorming sessions about how to make sense of this new tool. What struck me the most from these sessions was that my students were amazed, of course, at what ChatGPT was capable of doing, but at the same time, consistently expressed a lack of confidence in using something like that for their own purposes. They talked about their unfamiliarity with AI tools in general. Will AI take over the world? Am I still needed as a person? Their uncertainties about how professors and universities would be viewing the use of AI tools. Their concerns about committing academic integrity violations unknowingly, and so on. These discussions happened at the same time when news about the New York Public School District was banning ChatGPT, and people were talking about how ChatGPT is going to make cheating so much easier, and we're going to have to deal with plagiarism every day in our teaching. And I realized that my students clearly were not part of that group of students because they generally were trying to stay away from the tool to minimize trouble. I typically distribute an information sheet to learn about my students at the beginning of a term. And from the information sheets, I learned that most of my students, domestic multilingual students, were first-generation college students and or were on needs-based scholarships. It was clear that they were very motivated to to learn better. They wanted to succeed in college and become the pride of their families, but at the same time, they were reluctant to try new learning tools such as ChatGPT, which could offer them a lot of benefits. And they somehow preferred the conventional approaches to academic writing, which they thought were the safest and more manageable pathway forward for navigating college. This preference seemed somewhat ironic to me because these very students had been assessed academically as lacking in those conventional skills. So in a sense, I witnessed the rich get richer contradiction in my class personally. When it comes to Generation Z students, we often see descriptors like digital natives or tech savvy. This generation of students is believed to be growing up in a world where technology is pervasive in all aspects of their lives. It's often assumed that these students are comfortable and proficient in using digital tools. It may be true that a big portion of the students are naturally skilled at using tech tools, and they can quickly pick up something like ChatGPT and use it for their own purposes. But there is a significant percentage of students who don't have the same level of experience and skills when it comes to technology for learning purposes. And these students typically come from disadvantaged backgrounds and are very nervous about trying out new things because they don't want to get into trouble. This may inadvertently exacerbate the digital divide and also educational disparities. In a sense, the more powerful technology and AI get, the bigger the gap might become between the disadvantaged students and the peers because they're missing so much. They're not getting the benefits that AI and other advanced tools are capable of providing for learning purposes. So what can we do, or what can I do as an educator, as a classroom teacher? Two things that came to mind. First of all, I think we need to study our students and identify how tech savvy they really are when it comes to using technology for learning purposes. Advanced AI tools such as ChatGPT could be helpful in enhancing the learning experiences of traditionally disadvantaged students by providing them with personalized assistance, extensive examples, brainstorming partners, etc. But these types of support are only possible when students have the confidence of using those tools and they know what they can and cannot do and should not do. Otherwise, they will be just like the students in my winter class. They would be reluctant to try anything new, just to be on the safe side. Second, I think we need to adopt a fresh perspective towards teaching writing and be prepared to engage in an ongoing exploration together with our students of how AI tools shape writing expectations, writing and learning processes, ethical considerations, and all other relevant questions. Fostering open and critical discussions about these issues is necessary to empower students, especially those coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, to actively experiment with new technologies, knowing that we don't have the answers to all of the questions yet. As technology rapidly evolves, both educators and students probably need to develop the ability to adapt and make sense of new tools when we don't know everything, when the full picture probably might not come until decades later. And we still need to be able to make sense of these tools and purposefully and responsibly use them for teaching and learning purposes. This might be the new reality for teaching and learning. And these are some of my immediate thoughts about AI and advanced technologies coming from a teaching perspective. I think both the affordances and benefits of advanced AI tools make it imperative for us teachers, educators to teach with technologies and help students develop AI literacy skills so they can handle their learning to a level that reflects the rapid advances in technology. I can't say I'm an expert in AI or technology, but I feel an obligation to reimagine my own ways of teaching and thinking about new technologies so I'm not holding my students back unintentionally. One thing is for sure, I will have to learn together with my students, and we have to explore what teaching and learning mean with all these advanced AI tools. Thank you.
Thank you, Chen. That was really a great perspective. We don't have a ton of time for questions, but I'm going to give you one first because this is specifically related to what you were just talking about. How do you, did you, and if so, how, do you scaffold supports for your students to use the AI? And did any of them respond or differently once they became more familiar with things?
When I first tried incorporating ChatGPT in my writing class, I was right after it was released, a couple months after it was released. And I thought my students were all familiar with it and that they were already using it for cheating or legitimate purposes. But when I asked them, nobody in my class knew about that tool. So I designed a short questionnaire about ChatGPT. I had students go online and figure out what it was. And I asked them to try the tool on their own. And then we had class discussion sessions about their first observations. And we brainstormed about possible things that they thought ChatGPT would be capable of doing. And then I showed them examples of advanced ways of using ChatGPT. And they were all very, very amazed at what this tool was capable of. And I think one possible way of managing a ChatGPT and tools like this is to first distribute a background survey of some sort to so instructors can get information about where our students are at. And then based on that, we provide opportunities for them to talk about their perspectives and understanding, preliminary understanding of tools like that, and then show them examples, advanced ways of using the tools, and then maybe discussing affordances, biases, problems. So it's going to require a continuous effort and process, I think. But eventually, I hope at least my students wouldn't be as reluctant to try something like that for their future studies.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key things that you said was, like, this is evolving, right? This is going to be fluid.
Right.
And so that's why you're checking in with them. That's terrific. A question, and I don't, any of the panelists may answer this one. How can we determine when it is too soon to introduce AI writing strategies to our students? A lot of us have been talking about college students, and we've got some K-12 educators here going, what about us? Mark, do you want to take the first stab at that? Because that's a fun one.
Sure. And I hope this, can people hear me? I hope this doesn't sound shocking to people. But we have a lot of AI related research related to children's learning. You'll hear some more of it from my colleague Ying Xu, who's at University of Michigan. We'll talk about some more of that later today. But one project we're working on is we're using AI to help create narrative-based dialogic ebooks for preschool use in Latino communities on science topics. So we're using ChatGPT and Midjourney to help create these stories. And of course, we're editing them, and then we're inserting conversational agents in them. You'll hear about this kind of work later. But we came up with this idea. My colleague Andres Bustamante came up with the idea. After kids have experience, using and reading and listening to these stories, what if we had the class create their own stories? Now, these are preschool kids who might be as young as 3 and 4 and can't even read yet, but still a teacher can lead them through a project where, let's write a story together on such and such a topic. And I'm going to, put this into ChatGPT and then create something and read it to the students, and students can talk about changing it and things. So do I think preschool students should be writing with ChatGPT? No. I don't happen to think that, even high school students should be writing with ChatGPT. But I think there are lots of ways, age-appropriate ways at all levels to start having children aware of AI and aware of how it functions. At a high school level, it might be things like, producing texts. The teacher can produce texts created by ChatGPT, and students can compare them to texts written by their classmates and seeing the similarities and differences and things. So it's a gradual process of developing awareness, you know, before full-on use, which would happen later.
Thank you, Mark. I think we have time for one more question. So what about using AI we've talked a lot about writing. What about using it for reading? I guess Mark sort of covered that. Does anybody else have some thoughts? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, anybody else have some other thoughts on reading? Because there were a couple questions about reading.
I mean, Elizabeth is our reading expert in the panel. You know, I don't know if she's
Any thoughts,
dean
Elizabeth? Anything you
of,
want to play?
Elizabeth is dean, by the way, of the School of Education, which skyrocketed to first place in the rankings of the country. So she's pretty busy doing a lot of other stuff. I don't know if she's had time to think about this, but Elizabeth?
No, we skyrocketed because we have Ying Shu, so that's why we became #1. We love her. You know, I do think about this a lot. I study literacy, and I actually think that the work done to work with kids on corroborating writing, on, you know, prompting, all of that work will help improve reading skill as well. And, you know, I will take this moment to say that, you know, we know that reading demands many skills. It certainly demands foundational skills like knowledge of, you know, phonology and phonemic awareness, but it demands much more. And I'm with Mark in the belief that we can start this work, you know, examining AI and reading from AI with very young children, very young children. The younger, the better, because they will start to really be able to learn to read in very different ways. And I see Paul's comment, you need to be a sophisticated reader to use AI, but you can learn to be a sophisticated reader by using AI with guidance and scaffolds. So I think it's, you know, we always say in literacy, reading and writing are two sides of the same coin. And actually, David Olson, long ago, back there with Walter Ong, Mark, said that writing is actually what we do first as human beings. We're always making our mark, and watch little children, they are writing from very young ages. And so thinking about how we use writing to teach reading and use the analysis of AI generated writing, I think will absolutely help reading skills skyrocket.
I love that. Thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate that perspective. I think that wraps up our first presentation. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for a thoughtful and thought-provoking discussion. There were a ton more questions. I'm sorry we're out of time. We will see what we can do to address them in some other fashion at some point. But I think we will be moving to the next panel to keep us all on schedule.